So we're here in London with Judge Marilyn Mornington. You've had a very active career. In fact, you're actually a district judge in the United Kingdom, and which is quite a significant position, legal position, because you have a lot of judges under you. But before we just get into a conversation, I'd appreciate it. One, you've only recently converted to Islam, so maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that.
I've been specialising in crime against women, violence against women and child abuse now for some 10 to 12 years on a policy level for the United Kingdom. And I became, by no choice of my own, because of the work I was doing, closely involved with violence against women in the Muslim communities in this country. And in order to understand better where they were coming from, began to read about Islam, began to read the Quran, and to mix with Muslims. I would have to say I don't think I really ever had any choice in the matter, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had his eyes on me, and that was it. From that moment on, without any choice of mine, I kept on meeting one person after the other who led me down a path where there really was no turning back from, because the more I got to know about Islam, about the Prophet, peace be upon him, it became obvious to me that this is what I want, where I wanted to belong, and it was what I wanted to believe. And I always felt very comfortable with the family life and the stories of the wives of the Prophet and the companions, and it was just somewhere that over a period of time, and I would have to say, Sheikh Hamza, from your own writings and your tapes that I was listening to, I realised this was obviously the life.
So in terms of, I mean, obviously you've dealt a lot with the Muslim issues, and I think we're all curious, you know, how bad is the situation, given that you've been involved in Muslim women's issues in particular, but what type of things have you come across just in your legal practice?
What we are seeing every day, both in my day-to-day practice and also on the committees that I'm having to deal with things, are issues of forced marriage, where people just do not understand the difference between their cultural practices, particularly those of which we have almost 2 million in this country from the South Asian continent, that these practices are not Islamic, they are cultural, and part of my work is to point that out. Arising from forced marriage, we have honour-based violence, girls who are killed because they are trying to breach those cultural practices, either trying to run away from forced marriage or being within a forced marriage which has led to violence, trying to escape it. We have huge problems, one would have to say, in the United Kingdom of people being married to their first cousins against their wishes, tied in with the value of the British passport rather than anything else.
So bringing people from back home for...
Still, it's the first time we've ever had a wave of immigrants when 80% are still marrying from back home. That has very large socio-economic and educational difficulties, because the community here, because they're continuing to marry, mostly, if we're talking about the Pakistani community from Mirpur, which I have visited, which is a very particularly poor part of Pakistan, where the current rates of literacy are only 3% for women and 35% for men. So if you're continuing to bring in spouses with that lack of education, it has big impacts on the community here and their advancement, and they're continuing to fail in that. And I think if you look to why young men in particular are turning to crime and drugs, or perhaps to terrorism, I think a lot of it lies in the root there, and there are real difficulties in the family life.
Well, another thing that's interesting is you've actually gone, for the British government, you've gone to overseas. You've been to Pakistan, yes, and looked at women's issues there, and also now just recently Saudi Arabia. How was that experience? Was that the first time you'd visited Muslim countries? And
Yes, before I went to Pakistan, where I've been working for several years now, and I probably go about twice a year, I hadn't visited a Muslim country. I've also been recently to Turkey as part of my government work. And of course each experience is completely different, and the women in each of the countries, although they are all very strong and amazing women, are very different in their world that they live in. In Saudi Arabia, which I've just returned from a few weeks ago, a most amazing experience to see such highly educated, serene, beautiful women who fully contribute to Saudi Arabian life, both in terms of the businesses they run, the work they do in hospitals, and the amazing charitable work they do. Again, we're able to come back here and break down the preconceptions and hopefully move forward together. As a result of the trip, the British Foreign Office are looking to bring a delegation of Saudi women over here, particularly to look at advancing together issues over violence.
You were particularly looking at issues over violence in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, right. We looked at all aspects of women's life in Saudi Arabia, but my particular interest was looking at issues of how they're tackling and beginning to tackle issues of violence against women and children. I was very lucky to have a meeting with a Sharia judge. I think he was terrified meeting me. But,
really? That's an interesting experience.
He was very good to meet me and has kindly invited me to come back and actually see the courts in action.
That's wonderful.
But also I met doctors there, and they're setting up a nationwide network in Saudi Arabia of specialist paediatricians and psychologists.
To report abuse?
Yes, so that there'll be special teams of doctors throughout Saudi Arabia who will identify or themselves or have cases referred to them, will learn the specialist things that are needed by the courts and are working in conjunction with the Sharia courts to start addressing these matters. And I can tell you that the Sharia judge I met put me in no doubt whatsoever of how seriously he and his brothers are intending to take this matter. I'm hoping in the future that they'll have female judges.
Yes,
so that
yes, yes, I think so.
Next year they're going to have the first female law students, so that's the start.